I've been putting this one off for far too long. It's time to start building this thing. Let's get into this. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. Now those of you who've been following along for the last while know that I have been dying to get into this build. This is my Tamiya DT-03 Racing Fighter, which I picked up several months back. In fact, I've already done an unboxing video on this. And if you want to check that video out, I'll leave a link in the cards somewhere on the screen, and I'll leave a link in the description down below. I've been putting this build off while I've been waiting for hop-up and upgrade parts to arrive. Now, of course, given everything going on in the world right now, shipping times are incredibly long. But I've finally received everything that I need in order to get into this build. Now, before I do, I should mention, this build is going to actually span several videos. It's not going to be done just in this one video today. And I'm hoping that in the end it'll culminate with a final running of the DT-03 so we can all see exactly what the DT-03 chassis and the Racing Fighter is all about. So without any further ado, let's get into this thing. We're going to open this box up. I'm going to lay out all the parts that we're going to need for today's build, and we'll get started. Alright, so now that we got everything unboxed and placed in various plastic containers around my work area here, we can actually get started. Now, for those of you eagle-eyed viewers who are watching the sped up unboxing just a few seconds ago, you probably noticed a whole lot of hop-up parts that I didn't actually talk about during the unboxing video. Now, we're going to talk about each one of them as we go through the build sequence, and we'll get into exactly what I'm going to be using and why I'm using them as we go through this build. But now, let's get started. So here we got the instructions, and let's get into this. Now, just real quick to talk about some of the tools that I'm going to be using. I have a pair of scissors, I've got a set of needle nose pliers, some flat cutters, I've got my hobby knife, I've also got a set of tweezers, I've got a tray here for holding fasteners, it's a magnetic tray, and I've also got what is very quickly becoming one of my favorite RC accessories, and that is this Tamiya Craft Tools RC tool set. I actually did a review of this tool set not too long ago, and I'll post a link in the cards on the screen here as well if you want to check out that review. This is very quickly becoming one of my favorite things out there. This is great. So let's get into this build. Now, step one, the instructions, they say to plug in the battery and put it on charge. Now, I've already done that with my battery. My battery's already been charged up and ready to go. And the reason why they tell you to do this actually becomes evident a few steps from now. So we're going to move on from step one and on to step two. Step two calls for the two chassis halves and some of the felt tape that's found in parts bag A. So first, let's get out chassis and the chassis bag. So here are the chassis halves. We're going to use our flat cutter, cut these out. Now, one of the big reasons why I'm actually really excited about this build, and I did mention this during the unboxing, but this is my very first Tamiya buggy build in probably over 2 decades, maybe even 2.5 decades. My last Tamiya buggy build was the original Hornet release way back in the mid to late 80s. I don't exactly even remember the year that I built it. I think it might have been 1987. So for me, this is really something special because it's been a long time since I put together a Tamiya buggy. So I'm really, really excited about this. So we have the 2 chassis halves, and now we need the tape. It's actually inside parts bag A. So let's get into parts bag A. I like to keep my work area relatively clean. It may not look like that 100% right now, but I do tend to do that with my work area. So now they give you, this is one thing that I really love about Tamiya, and if you've never built a Tamiya kit, you definitely need to do so. But the one thing that I do love about Tamiya is that their instruction manual is probably, without a doubt, one of the best instruction manuals produced by any company for RC ever. I mean, these things are fantastic. So I'm just using the images from the actual manual itself to cut this sponge material into the size that I need. And in this particular case, I'm going to need, I believe, 4 of this size and 2 of this size. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those right now. All right, so following the instructions, they tell us to put 2 of these sponge pieces right here at the very back of the chassis. Hope you guys can see that. Right there. And you're supposed to double them up. So you put 2 of them, one on top of the other. Yep. There we are. And then the one goes at the front along this flat piece. Right here. Good. Again, I hope you guys can see that. And you do it on both sides. All right. So that, 2 halves of the chassis with the foam inserted finishes step 2. On to step 3. Now to complete step 3, we are going to need 3 BA5 3 by 10 millimeter tapping screws. Again, we're just going to be building parts bag A today, so that's why I've got that really close. I'm going to need 3 BA5. Now, again, the great thing with Tamiya manuals is you can actually put the fastener right up onto the illustration and make sure that you are using the correct fastener for the application. Now, the rest of these I'm going to just place into my magnetic tray because I know we're going to need them for today. So that's where these are going to go. So we need 3 of these. 1, 2, and 3. The rest can all go into the parts tray, and we'll come to these later. If you are living in the United States and you do have access to a Harbor Freight close by, I strongly suggest heading over to Harbor Freight and grabbing at least one, if not two of these. They're relatively inexpensive, and they are very, very handy for working on your RC car. So step 2, like I said, step 3, sorry, calls for 3 of these 3 by 10 millimeter screws, and they go into the 3 holes here on this side of the chassis. So 1, 2, 3, and that means there's 1, 2, and 3 right through there. So let's get into that. There. And that's done. Step number 3 is complete. On to step number 4. Now for step number 4, we're going to need 3 BA4 self-tapping screws. These are 3 by 12, and 1 BA3 3 by 15. So let's see if we can't find those. So there we are. And we are also going to need the uprights, M1 and M3. Now, when you buy the Racing Fighter or any DT-03 chassis, this is the M sprue that comes with it. However, I've actually opted for the hop-up option that Tamiya has available, which is to say the M parts that are all reinforced. Now, I'm not exactly sure what reinforced means with respect to these M parts. I don't know if it's more gusseting on the parts or if it's just a different plastic, but I do know that the M parts are largely suspension pieces, and they actually take a fair bit of abuse. So this was one of the reasons why I opted for the M parts, the reinforced M parts. So in this case, what I'm looking for is this part and this part. So this is M1 and this is M3. So let's get those off the sprue. And there's the second. So, and if anyone wants to do the same, so this is OP 1816 or part number 54816 from Tamiya. That's the M parts, reinforced M parts sprue for the DT-03 chassis. So let's take a look at how this goes together. So these two parts are effectively just mirror copies of one another. So the M3 is the one that goes on this side here, and the M1 is the one that goes on this side here. Now let's take a look, and we'll notice that on this side here we use 2 of the 3x12 BA4 screws, and on the other side we use 1 of the 3x12s and 1 of the 3x15s on the lower hole. So keep that in mind when you're building your own. And there we can see So suspension upright on one side and the other side, and that is step 4 complete. All right, so now we're on to step 5, where we will assemble the servo saver. This is the servo saver that comes with the DT-03. We're going to need a few fasteners and a few additional bits. Let's get these bags cut open. Good. So, first things first, we're going to need part P3, which is this piece here. And to accompany that, we need to utilize these two ball connectors and the accompanying nuts to go with them. Good. So that's that assembly complete. Next we need part P4, which is this one here. All right, and this just snaps over like that. And that is the servo saver basically assembled. We'll set that aside for just a moment. We're going to come back to that. The next part we need is the servo itself. Now, the servo I'm going for with this build is a Savox. This is a Savox SC-1257TG. Not sure you guys can see that. Let me get it out of the box, give you a better idea. Now, this servo may be a little overkill for this particular build. This is a rather expensive servo. It's certainly not a budget-friendly one. However, the reason why I went with this is largely because I've seen it used in competition buggies, two-wheel drive buggies, and it's largely used because of its speed. This is a very fast servo, although it does have a decent amount of torque. This is a very, very fast servo. So the next part of the instructions call for the servo to be installed and mounted in the servo holder, or the servo mount. Now, the kit itself comes with this mount. It's on the M sprue that we took a look at earlier. However, on the reinforced M parts, they actually include the servo mount as well, like a reinforced version of the servo mount, which again I'm assuming is either more beefed up unit, or it's just a better or a stronger quality plastic. However, after doing a lot of research on the DT-03 before going ahead and starting this build, a lot of people who have the DT-03 have actually suggested that rather than using the plastic mount, you're better off actually using an aluminum mount. Now, Tamiya makes their own aluminum mount as a hop-up option. However, I ended up actually opting for one from GPM Racing Products. Now, I've used GPM in the past, and I know that their stuff is very, very good, is very high quality. This is the DT-3024BK. Now, in this case, the BK stands for black. I opted for the black version, but they do have different colors. They had blue, orange, green, silver. I think there were a few other different colors that I had that, you know, I don't recall. But they did have a few other colors, so if you didn't want, you know, a black one or a blue one, you could go with a ton of different colors that they have. Now, this is a machined aluminum piece. That's really nice, a very, very high quality machined piece. But because this is aluminum, it already has all the screw holes and threads already run through it. So you won't actually be using the self-tapping screws as shown in the instructions here on the DT-03. Instead, you have to use the machine screws that GPM include with the kit. So make sure if you go this route, you use the appropriate machine screws for this. Now, according to the instructions here, we can see that the mount, there's a short end, which is the side where the wire, the servo comes out, and there's the long end. Now we can use this, the M mount or the stock servo mount as a sort of guide, and this is how the GPM one would mount, just like this. So now let's go ahead and put the servo into the mount itself. So there we are. So that now has the servo mounted into its mount. Good. And that technically completes step 5. Now we move on to step 6. All right. So step 6 actually, for the most part, walks us through zeroing the servo. Now, not too long ago, a very short time ago, I actually posted a video where I have already done exactly that. So this servo has already been zeroed out and it's in its neutral position. And I did so because I needed to bind my the radio or the transmitter that I'm going to be using with this model to the receiver. And during that video, I actually zeroed out, I connected the servo and zeroed it out as well. And if you want to check out that video, I'll link it in the cards up above here. So this servo has already been zeroed out, but ultimately what the instructions tell you to do is connect your battery to the ESC, which is also connected to the receiver, turn the transmitter on, and the moment you turn it on, it will zero the servo to its neutral position, and then just shut everything off. That way you can mount the servo horn in the correct position. But like I said, I've already done that, so we're not going to worry about that here. Now, so here's the servo saver itself. We've got to mount it, and in order to do so, we have to select the correct adapter. Now, for the Savox, they use a Futaba or Tamiya style spline on their servos. So that turns out to be P5 here on the sprue. So I'm going to cut that off of here. And that means we are done with the sprue. And I can double check that just to make sure. Put that on there. Yep. That is the correct one. So that part goes on. And then servo saver goes on, and the one last piece we need is, of course, this little washer, which is very, very important. Don't forget that piece. Goes in there, and now we need the correct screw. Servo, I believe, maybe this one here. And it is. There. So that now completes step 6. So the servo is now installed in its mount with the appropriate servo saver on the servo itself. So on to step 7. Now step 7 calls for installing the 4 adjuster cups onto 2 adjustable threaded rods. Now I've already gone ahead and pre-built these parts. They're relatively easy to do, much like the instructions. Put the 2 on either side and start to screw them together, and then use the instructions here to get to the 50mm distance between the 2 adjustable cups. You can use a vernier caliper if you'd like. If you've got a ruler or a scale, you can measure it. However, the instructions here are really quite accurate. The drawing here is really very accurate, so you can just use the drawing and get it right on the money. So I've already gone ahead and pre-built these, so these are already done. Next, all we gotta do is just snap them into place onto the servo saver. So, and they should snap on relatively easily. What I should mention, when you do assemble these, make sure that one drive cup is facing up and the other drive cup is facing down, so they are facing in opposite directions of one another. All right, so let's get these on. And that now completes step 7 of the instructions right there. So now we go on to step 8, where we thread, or we install the servo itself and thread these 2 steering rods into the chassis like this. So the 2 arms slide through these 2 holes on the chassis, one side and the other side. All right. And then take the servo mount and slide it into position. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the way it goes in and then slides back just a little bit, just like that. It goes, slides back just a little bit to align the mounting holes. And looking through the chassis, I can see the mounting holes are perfectly lined up. Now, remember, the instructions here call for BA5, 4 BA5 screws that go into the side of the chassis on either side here and here. Now these are 3x10mm tapping screws. If I was using the kit plastic servo mount, that's what I would use. But because we've gone with the aluminum servo mount, we're going to be using, of course, the machine screws that came with the kit. So let's start these off and get them threaded in. All right, so that's the servo now installed in the chassis. And we can rotate it. Yep. Plenty of clearance, plenty of room. We're good. And we can even access the screw if we need to. Perfect. So that's step 8 now complete. All right, so now on to step 9. Now to do step 9, we need a U-shape shaft, and we need the 2 lower front arms here and here, which I've already cut off the sprue. When you do cut it off the sprue, there's an additional piece of plastic here that you also have to cut off and just discard so you won't need it. And we also need part C2, which came off the same sprue as the chassis itself, which is this piece right here. So I've already taken that off the sprue as well. Now, what the instructions call for is for the lower arms and part C2 to be assembled in this way using the U-shaped shaft. And the U-shaped shaft acts as the pivot for the arms themselves. However, I'm not going to be using the U-shaped shaft in my build. Instead, I'm actually going with some Tamiya hop-up options. This is part number 54613. This is a stainless steel suspension shaft set that's actually meant for an MO5 chassis. Now, I actually got this little tip after watching Mark Bryan RC build his DT-03. Now, he did this where he used some stainless steel shafts to replace the screws that are used on the back or on the rear arms of his DT-03, but I'm going to actually be doing that on the front suspension in this build right now. So let's get into this. Now, this hop-up option set actually comes with a number of different size shafts. We're not going to be using all of these. I'm only going to be using one particular size. And the size that I'm going to be using is this one here, which is, and I can tell you in just a moment, it is 3 by 48 millimeter size stainless steel shaft. Now, the reason why I'm going with a stainless steel shaft as opposed to using the U-shaped shaft is because these are stainless steel. I don't believe the U-shaped shaft is, and so this will avoid any sort of corrosion. Given that this is a buggy, it's going to be going through some rather harsh sort of terrain and rather harsh conditions. So I'd rather have stainless steel. So that's what we're going to be using, along with 4 E-clips to hold everything together instead of the U-shaped shaft. So let's get this thing together now. There. So that's done. So that's step 9, front suspension, lower arms, finished. Little variation from the kit, but I'm actually happier with this. So let's move on to step 10. So now, step 10 calls for the installation of the lower suspension, front lower suspension, just as we just finished assembling, along with part M7 and 4 BA3 3 by 15 millimeter tapping screws. So let's get 3 by 15 millimeter tapping screws, get those ready. And that's the 4th one there. So that's the 4 BA3 3 by 15 millimeter tapping screws. And we need part number M7. Now M7, again, we could use the kit part, but because I opted for the reinforced M parts sprue, we're going to use the reinforced piece, which is right here. Now, this is actually the lower skid plate, which as far as I'm concerned, it's well worth upgrading to the reinforced kit, the reinforced M parts kit, just for something like this, because again, being a buggy, this thing is going to take a lot of abuse. So now again, normally if we were to be building this as per the kit, meaning we're going to use the U-shaped shaft, that shaft would actually nest into this little area here, but we're not doing that with this build, so we don't really have to worry about it. Instead, we just nest that into there, and you can see it actually fits. It's designed such that it fits right into those holes, so it aligns perfectly. Then we take the chassis itself and we install like that right there using the 4 screws. All right, so that there is step 8 complete, or sorry, step 10 is now complete, and we move on to step 11. Now step 11 requires that we use 2 BA10 3x32 millimeter screws, well, screw pins, so right there and right there. Don't need you. And we need the front suspension arms. Now, this is where we are going to be deviating from the instructions themselves. The upper arms, which are here, we won't actually be using the upper arms in this build. Instead, I've opted for the Tamiya hop-up option DT-03 full turnbuckle set. This is part number 54572, which you can see here. This is a full turnbuckle set, which replaces the upper A-arms completely, both on the front and the rear suspension. So this is what we're going to be going with for the front and rear suspension for the DT-03. So let's take a look at the instructions that are included with this. So now this is interesting. The turnbuckle set, it looks like it actually includes the full turnbuckles for the steering arms. I didn't realize that. I thought that this was just for the upper suspension, both front and rear. So I will probably end up backtracking after this video is done and replacing these with the proper turnbuckle set. But no big deal, it's the same basic sort of installation. You assemble it the same sort of way. It's also the same 50 millimeter distance. Just take off these old steering rods and replace them with the new ones. I'll do that later. Right now, I'm far more interested in doing the upper arms. So in order to do the upper arms, we're going to need 4 of these. So we're going to cut these off of the sprue. And we need to get the actual turnbuckle shafts themselves. We're going to need 2 of these. One for one side, one for the other. And look at that. Tamiya was gracious enough to give us a very nice turnbuckle wrench. Good. I don't think I've ever had a turnbuckle wrench. So these, you can see the longer shafts here. These are going to be meant for the steering rods themselves when I replace those with the turnbuckle set. So those are the That's the longer one for the steering rod, and the two shorter ones that are in these bags are going to be used for the rear suspension when I get to that in another video. So we're going to leave these aside. And of course the next thing we need is going to be the ball connectors themselves. So we'll get into these in just a minute. Let's start assembling some turnbuckles. All right, so the upper A-arm turnbuckles are now complete. When you do assemble these, it's good to take note that they are actually reverse thread from one another. So when you're actually assembling these things, on the one side you're going to twist it one way, and on the other side you're actually twisting it the opposite direction. So when you do put these together, keep that in mind. That's kind of an important thing. Now, I've already assembled both of these, and they are both at a 20 millimeter distance. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these actually replace the upper A-arms. So we won't be using the upper A-arms, instead we'll be using these. And next we need to use two 3x18 millimeter screws for the inside and two 3x15 millimeter screws for the outside. So let's start with this first. So we'll do the 3x18 first with this. So that threads through here. So that's that. Now, stepping back to the DT-03 instructions, we're still on step 11. We'll take one of the turnbuckle arms and snap it into place. We'll take the other one and snap it into place. Done. So now, step 11 is finished. All right, so now we move on to step 12. Now, step 12 requires that we use two 3x22 millimeter screw pins. That we also use BA15 and BA16. These are the left and front uprights. And it also called that we use B1, which are the front axles, which come off of these screws here. All right. We won't need these until later, so we'll set these aside for the time being. Very good. And again, according to the instructions, we could see we're supposed to take off this little bit right here and right here. That's just garbage. And we do the same on this one here. Very good. All right. So now we assemble, I guess, our front axles. Now, the directions do sort of show that there's a small mark. I'm not exactly sure you guys can see it on camera here, but there's a small mark on this upright. This needs to be facing upward. So we'll start with this one. Take B16 and then take one of our screw pins, drive it down, and then drive it in. Now, to be honest with you, I actually wouldn't mind considering, before I go through with this, I wonder if I can use 22 millimeter stainless steel pins that I could use in place of these screw pins. And again, based on what Mark Bryan RC had said, these screw pins have a tendency of rusting out. And to be honest with you, just looking at them and holding them, these are literally just black oxide, probably just black oxide steel. These will rust the moment they see any sort of moisture. So why don't I try and utilize these two 22mm pins instead of the screw pins. So this is hop up part number 54395, low friction suspension shaft, 3x22mm. So let's give this a shot. Again, taking a look at this. Now these were actually intended to be used with the DT-02 and a TT-01 chassis, which I may be able to use these as well on here for the lower front. So I should have those two. All right, let's give this a shot. All right, so let's go back to this assembly. So as I said, look for the mark that's on the top, which we have there. And then we have B16. So we'll leave those aside for just a moment. Take one of our stainless steel shafts, put an E-clip on it. Right, that's one. Run the stainless steel shaft down through, perfect fit, and then we run another E-clip. All right, so that's the first one. Let's see if we can't build the second one. All right, so that is the uprights. That is to say, that's step 12, now finished, the two uprights. So now we move on to step 13, which again calls for two more. Actually, it calls for 4 screw pins, but because we're deviating from the actual instructions for the DT-03, first things first, we need to utilize the ball connector and screw that comes with the turnbuckle set. We mount that to the top of the upright like this. We'll just tighten this one down. So that's done. To the other side. And the ball connector is facing the rear of the vehicle so that we can connect the turnbuckles themselves. That's done. And then for the lower bit, and this was the reason why I bought these 22mm stainless steel shafts, was for this very installation here. Now, the instructions, like I said, they call for using the screw pins, but I'm not going to be using them. In fact, I'm going to avoid them as much as I can and just use these stainless steel shafts. So, as before, you install one E-clip on the end of each shaft to make your job a little bit easier. All right, the second one. All right, that E-clip is now installed. So, starting on this side over here, we line up the upright, insert the stainless steel shaft until it comes out the other end. Then we install an E-clip and that's done there. Then we bring our turnbuckle and that part is on. Now we tackle the other half, the other side I should say. Insert stainless steel shaft in through turnbuckle, through the upright. We take another E-clip install it on the shaft, and that's that. Then we connect our upper turnbuckle, and then, as per step 13, we install the steering rods. One on one side and one on the other. And so there we have it. That brings us to the end of step 13 and the end of this build video. So there we have it, guys. So stay tuned, because the next part we'll be tackling parts bag B, which will be all the sort of gearing and the transmission that goes into the back of the DT-03. That'll be in our next video. Thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you found this one useful, if not somewhat entertaining. If you did, go ahead and smash that like button. And if you want to follow along with the rest of this build, feel free to subscribe and hit that notification button so that when the next video goes up, you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching, guys. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.